So as you may recall, when I talked about the early development of the Walt Disney World Resort, up by the Magic Kingdom they had planned for several resort hotels. And they wound up building just the two. They built the Polynesian, which is right here that I'm standing next to, and the Contemporary, which you can see right over there. So those would be the two that they actually wound up building. And planning up the Vacation Kingdom, Disney had already planned for 5 resort hotels to be in the area near where the Magic Kingdom would be. So when Disney constructed their 3D models, they actually included all 5 resorts in their models, along with the monorail lines to show how it would actually look. This 3D model was on display in the Preview Center prior to Walt Disney World's opening, and remained there for a few years after, as they still planned to build the additional resort hotels. So the question is, why didn't any of these hotels come to fruition? The biggest reason is the oil embargo of 1973. It caused a downturn in the economy and fewer people were traveling by car to get to the Walt Disney World Resort, the Vacation Kingdom, and so Disney had to find other ways to lure in tourists, and building new hotels was not going to be the answer to that question. So they essentially shelved all the ideas until a future time. Also, in the early renderings of maps and guides that they put out, all of the resorts showed up because the plan was to start building these hotels shortly after the Magic Kingdom opened, and they had a little more operating capital to work with. If we look at a 1971 era aerial photo, we can see that the land was already cleared for each of the 3 resorts that we're putting on the map here just to show you where they're located. Later in the history, they actually wound up building the Grand Floridian Resort and Spa. But originally, that site was planned to be something else. So let's talk a little bit about what it was. The first of the 3 resorts was the one that was the furthest along in planning. They already had architectural models, had planned up for most of the designs, and had thought through what the resort was going to be. It was going to be an Asian-themed resort, named appropriately enough, the Asian Resort. They had already put together some marketing materials for it and said since the opening day, the demand for accommodations throughout Central Florida has exceeded the supply. On site are 2 theme resort hotels, the Contemporary and the Polynesian Village, operated at near 100% capacity all year long. Recognizing that the public will always prefer to stay within the Vacation Kingdom site, the company will soon begin architectural work on a 3rd theme resort, the 500-room Asian Hotel. Construction is planned for 1974 with the formal opening date to take place later that year. As you can see, they already had a conceptual design for what the restaurant might look like. But as time progressed, Disney changed directions. Sometime in the early 1980s, when they started to put resorts back on the drawing table, they actually decided to change the theme of this resort from the Asian Resort to the Grand Floridian. So that's what we wound up with, was the Grand Floridian in its place. While the theming may be different, at least we got the resort hotel in the space that they had already planned for. And by the way, here's a little nugget you might be interested in. In 1988, after the resort opened, the Beach Boys actually filmed the music video for Kokomo here at the Grand Floridian Resort. And then another location that was planned for was somewhere between where the Contemporary is today and the spires of the Magic Kingdom, which you can see. You can see part of Cinderella's castle and maybe a little bit of the Space Mountain over there, kind of in that area. There was another one planned somewhere between these two. So that was another one of the resorts. So let's talk about that one. The second hotel is the Persian Hotel. The Persian was probably the least well-imagined of the 3 hotels. It was the one that was slated for the furthest along in the process, and they hadn't done as many architectural drawings for it, though they had a plan for what it was going to look like. What they said about it was, there will be an exotic Far Eastern palace located on the northwestern shore of Bay Lake. Jewel-like mosques and columns will rise above the landscape courtyards, while terraced sun decks offered sculptured swimming pools and old Persian-style dining facilities. Guests will practically be able to sail to their own rooms through a sheltered marina. Now, there was a discussion to renew the idea for this resort in 1978. The Shah of Iran at the time, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, offered to fund the project's construction and operation, but the Iranian Revolution happened a year later, and the project was permanently shelved at that point. So one of the interesting things here is this one would have been sitting on Bay Lake instead of the Seven Seas Lagoon, so it would have been facing the other way. Whereas the Contemporary straddles both, the other resorts would have all been exclusively on the Seven Seas Lagoon. This one would have only been on Bay Lake, which made it kind of an interesting compromise to put it in a different location. And because the resort loop monorail just ran around between the Magic Kingdom and all the hotels that were planned for the loop around the Seven Seas Lagoon, this would have required a spur line, that is a short line, to come up from the Transportation and Ticket Center to get to the Persian Hotel. And then finally, the third resort was somewhere between where the Contemporary is there and the Transportation, whoops, I'm going the wrong way, between there and the Transportation and Ticket Center, which is actually just over the top of the Polynesian. You can't quite see it from here, but it's right there. So then there's another one planned on the plot of land between the two, and that would have been the other resort. So let's talk a little bit about that one as well. The third hotel was the Venetian Resort. This would have been an enclosed small boat harbor and intricate system of waterways that would recreate the old world charm of the famed Italian city of canals. Shopping would be a unique experience as guests travel by gondola along streets of water and under ornate bridges linking various sections of the resort. The style is reminiscent of St. Mark's Square, complete with the 120-foot campanile, which would toll the time. The entire lobby will be glass-topped, creating a brilliant sunlit atrium effect indoors. Now, there's an interesting side note to the Venetian Hotel. Years after the Venetian Resort was shelved, plans came up in the early 1990s to build a hotel in the same spot. This hotel would have been called Disney's Mediterranean Resort and would have taken some inspiration from the Venetian Resort, but with a more Greek island sort of influence. There were a couple of reasons why the Mediterranean Resort didn't go forward, but the biggest one probably had to do with the fact that the land around the Seven Seas Lagoon, remember I said it had been dredged out because it was swampy, that particular tract of land was still too swampy to work with, and Disney would not have been able to build a hotel on that site without doing some architectural and structural work in order to maintain the foundation. I would like to point out that no good idea ever dies at Disney. So I talked about the Venetian Hotel they wanted to build over near the Magic Kingdom. And it would have been loosely based on St. Mark's Square. Well, when they decided on the Italy Pavilion, they created St. Mark's Square, essentially. And that's what this is, really. And so they did recreate it to a large degree thematically. Even though it's not a hotel and it's not in the same location, they didn't lose the concept. It's still here and it's still engaged. So I find that really interesting that they took the time and the effort to put it together here in a different way. So those would have been the resorts they had planned for the Seven Seas Lagoon area. So kind of between where the Transportation and Ticket Center is and the Magic Kingdom. That's what they had in mind. And remember that this is the Seven Seas Lagoon. This was not originally a body of water. What they did was they dredged out this entire area. It was all swampland, and they used it to build up what became the Magic Kingdom. So that way it was on very firm footing. They found some good footing around where the Magic Kingdom was. They used the sand they dredged out of here, put it on top of where they had the good footing, and then they built the Magic Kingdom on top of that. So the Magic Kingdom is actually one story up because of the amount of sand that they put in there. And as a result, they had this nice lake, the Seven Seas Lagoon that they dredged out. Now on the other side of the Contemporary, there's actually the Bay Lake. That was an original thing that was on the maps. It actually was a lake that existed here. So this one is completely man-made, that one was natural. So just kind of an interesting little side note. There is one other piece of information I'd like to share, and that's that Disney had planned for an actual sixth resort to be on the Disney property. This one would have also been on Bay Lake. But the interesting thing is they had already started to map out a location for it and had already started to clear some land to kind of be prepared to put it in there. This one was going to be called the Cypress Point Lodge and would have been located just across the canal from where the Venetian Resort was going to be. It would have been a rustic-themed resort that would have resembled Yellowstone Lodge. Now, why is this particular hotel interesting and this location interesting? Because this is the exact spot where they ultimately built the Wilderness Lodge. The Wilderness Lodge is actually inspired by and partially modeled after the Yellowstone Lodge that's in Yellowstone National Park. So there is more than a passing connection there between the two. Also, Disney decided to call the presidential suite the Yellowstone Suite, which draws back the connection even tighter. And that's the story of the Lost Resorts, the 3 or maybe 4 resorts that were never built on Disney property.